Noting the Steelers' past in drafting cornerbacks over the last 10-ish years, maybe even further back than that, Joey Porter Jr. is going to be looking to break what has kind of been known as a bad luck situation for the Steelers. Can he do it? We'll talk about that and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Wes Uhler. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy this on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday to Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first podcast listen every day because we're your team every day here on Locked On Steelers. And today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp. Now, as I said before, we're rejoined by my man, Wes Uhler from Steeler Nation Radio, as well as every West Virginia podcast known to man. He's Wes Uhler. Wes, great to have you back, man.
CC, it's good to be here, partner, and I tell you what, impressive work that you did today procuring these topics, because we're once again in a little bit of a standstill content-wise here. The draft is passed, and it's still relevant in a way, but it's not hot anymore like it was a couple weeks ago. But I tell you what, producer Chris to go along with host Chris here on this show, because you've got some good topics for us today. I'm looking forward to this.
I appreciate that. Well, let's lead off with the topic, and that's Joey Porter Jr., and specifically the situation with the Steelers past at drafting cornerbacks. Now, it was one of the funnier things that I would get comment-wise from fans in our YouTube comment sections and people on Twitter, but you can hit me up at Carter Catese on Twitter, by the way, if you ever want. But people asking, Chris, don't draft. They can't draft a corner. They don't draft corners well. They just don't do it. And I was just sitting there like, man, if there's a really good corner, don't you want them to take it so that can break kind of the bad luck string that they've had? And I want to point that out. I think it is more of a bad luck thing than a bad drafting thing, because yes, Artie Burns, bust of a pick in the first round. But you look at some of these other picks, Senquez Golson. How was anyone supposed to know if he would get hurt at the start of every season before it even began, and then never even touch the field? Guys like Justin Lane and Curtis Brown, who were third round picks, sure, swings and misses, but third round is when you start to get to the point where swings and misses are going to happen, especially at the cornerback position. And you have guys like Cortez Allen, who came in the fourth, Keenan Lewis, who was pretty good in the third round. Just got paid to go somewhere else. Then, of course, recently you have Cam Sutton, who was an absolute hit in the third round. Mm-hmm. So the Steelers, I do agree with people. It's been frustrating to see the Steelers and their lack of success in drafting cornerbacks in a team where, if they had just hit on one of those top tier on a top tier quarterback just one time in that 2010s era, maybe that's the cornerback that puts them over in some of their bigger playoff losses. When you look at, when they have to start Artie Burns or Cody Sensabaugh, or we're just extremely weak at cornerback. And now it flips to Joey Porter Jr., where all that pressure for years on top of, who his dad is and the history that he has with the organization, it's a lot of pressure on him. Wes, how much do you think that those past failures in the draft impact the situation right now and the pressure that's heaped upon the success of Joey Porter Jr.? Because other than him and Corey Trice, who's a seventh-round pick, they don't really have any young cornerbacks on this roster right now.
For me, Chris, not a ton, honestly. I know that's probably not the hot take that people want. Yes, the Steelers need Joey Porter to develop, to become a solid NFL corner, a top cornerback in the league. Maybe never all necessarily an all-pro future Hall of Fame type level, but they need him to be a handful of, oh yeah, that guy is an unquestioned number one corner who walks into training camp and they don't have to worry if they've got their guy or not. I think it's fair to expect him to be that at pick 32, to be a solid contributor, to be in the upper half of cornerbacks in the league, not necessarily again right away, but eventually. But all the past history aside, that has no bearing to me on Joey Porter Jr. I think he's got a lot of things in his story, doesn't he? I mean, he does have certainly the Steelers' history of not doing so well at drafting this position. His dad's time with Pittsburgh, growing up at North Allegheny, going to Penn State, all these different things. So there's a lot of, extra stuff around Joey Porter Jr. already. And we haven't even seen him have his first practice yet, first game, anything like that. But to me, if Joey Porter succeeds, it's not going to be just because all of a sudden the Steelers learned how to draft quarterbacks. If Joey Porter fails, it's not going to be, I told you the Steelers just can't hit on anybody, and Cam Sutton and Willie Gay were, exceptions to the rule or whatever. It's on him. He's his own situation in a vacuum, and he, again, has a lot of different storylines and things with him. But to me, he's in a great position to succeed. He's got a guy like Patrick Peterson to learn from, who I think there are some similarities in the games of those two. Not that I expect Joey to have the same ceiling as Pat Pete, who is probably a future Hall of Famer, I think.
Yeah.
But that there's a lot of similarities in kind of their game and their body types, and a great mentor to have for Joey Porter Jr. He's got Minka Fitzpatrick behind him. He's got guys like T.J. Watt and Cam Hayward in front of him on that defense as well too. So I think he's in a great situation to succeed, but I don't think a lot of this, is this the final straw? If the Steelers miss on another one here, what are they going to do? None of that needs to be directed towards Joey. He's his own player. This is his own opportunity, and he's got to go out there and write his own story. And man, I just kind of threw like every cliche in the book at you there, but it's true. I wouldn't be putting any stock into the Steelers' history at this position. I think this is different. I think they have rarely, Artie Burns and maybe Senquez Golson aside, they've rarely selected a guy this high at that position as well, too. Give him some time to develop, and if things go great right away, that doesn't mean that it's always going to go great. If he struggles out of the gate, that doesn't mean that he's a bust and he's going to be terrible. Give him a little time. Let him work with Pat Pete. Get familiar in that secondary, and I think you are going to have a good player.
And I also think that another factor to weigh in on this is that the situation, Artie Burns being the biggest bust of those situations, because, again, third-round pick, second-round pick guy who got hurt, third-round picks and fourth and later picks that just didn't work out, those are different. But a first-round pick when you miss, that means a lot.
It hurts.
It hurts. It's a complete devoid of value. If Artie Burns becomes a star cornerback, let's just say, or whoever they had picked at cornerback in the first round of the 2016 NFL draft, it changes the trajectory of 20. Like imagine him. Imagine
Chris. Imagine if he was just a Terrell Edmonds, kind of type of
solid guy.
Not a superstar, not someone you're breaking the bank for, and maybe he leaves in 5 years, but a solid contributor who plays a role on your defense. But you couldn't even get that out of Artie.
if you hit on that with Artie Burns, then let's say they still get Joe Hayden, then you have an ultimate cornerback duo that you're not even worried about for several years there. And then who knows what that does for the Steelers in the late 2010s. But I digress. Back to Joey Porter Jr. Big difference here in that situation is also when you look back at that 2016 NFL draft, the Steelers were dead set on William Jackson III. Now, William Jackson III not been not exactly a superstar cornerback himself, but a guy who at least was a capable starter.
He's had a career in the league, yeah.
Right. Not like Artie Burns, who right now is still a free agent, is kind of just floating around, seeing what contracts he can scoop up. But you go back to that year and what the Steelers got with Artie Burns, they did it because they really needed a cornerback, and the Bengals jumped ahead of them to go get William Jackson III, which put them in a situation where we waited for our guy. He was there. Now he's not. Kind of like the situation the Jets are
exactly
by the Steelers
exactly
when they went and got Will McDonald. And again, way much later in the draft, the Jets still had the 15th pick in the draft. Still a very good value pick. You go down to 25. 25 is in that range where you're outside the top 20. You need to really find your guy in that spot. And they thought their guy was William Jackson III. And that's not to mention that year there were already, I think, at least 3 cornerbacks that came off the board before William Jackson IV. So Artie Burns became the 5th cornerback there. There's misses all kind of like that. Joey Porter Jr. is not of that caliber. He was a guy that they wanted from the jump. You go back to this year and how this draft played out. Yeah, he came off in a similar point of the draft. But Joey Porter Jr. was also their guy for a while. There wasn't a sense of, oh man, they just kind of got boxed into Joey Porter Jr. No, there was considerations for them taking him with their first round pick. Then they got him in the second. To me, I think this was them actually picking the guy who they really thought all along could be a starting cornerback for a long time, and a person who they have a lot more ties to understand who they are and the kind of person he'll be in the locker room than Artie Burns was.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. And Chris, I think there's a really good chance that the Steelers had Joey Porter Jr. as a top 20 player on their big board.
He was the top 20 of mine.
And they got him at pick 32. So I guarantee I wasn't in the draft room, okay? But I guarantee you they didn't have Artie Burns as a top 20 player on their big board, right? They didn't have Senquez Golson as a top 20. They haven't had any of these corners that they've drafted over the years as a top 20 player on their big board. I think this one is a little bit different. And so that's why I would be more optimistic about this. In the past, it's felt like the Steelers have reached for cornerbacks, right? Where this time it feels like one fell into their lap. And so that's why I think there should be more glass half full with this one, certainly.
I agree with you there. We'll keep the conversation going on rookies because we have a question from a caller we want to get to about this rookie class and who might be the most impactful, whether it's just this year or long term. We'll get to that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. First, before we do any of that, I want to remind you this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. BetterHelp, of course, is the place where you go to find real licensed therapists who are here to help you get through and find the things that you need to do to better your life. Life is full of twists and turns. It's important to show yourself for yourself throughout the challenges that go through your day-to-day lives. I've placed plenty of times in my life where I've had to shoulder burdens, take on challenges, and I've found help to deal with those thanks to the help of professional therapists. And BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you. BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. And they have a special offer for all our listeners. That's 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Again, 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. 10% off betterhelp.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Wes, let's get into this topic because there's a caller who called in and asked a very good question. By the way, if you ever want to call in, it's 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute, and you'll get a chance to be on the show. And if you do that and donate $10 to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation campaign that I have going, you will be guaranteed a spot on the show to get your question heard on the air and get an answer from myself and possibly even the guest who's with me on that day. And this person was one of our first donations to the list on our campaign here. Shout out to Vincent Addison from Illinois, who has a question about this draft class. Here's Vincent.
Hey, Chris, it's Vincent Addison, Illinois. I appreciate the contributions for cystic fibrosis. I lost one of my best friends, Andy, in 2019 to it. He was next on the waiting list for a transplant, but he didn't make it. We miss you every day, Andy. So my question, we got a haul in the draft, but often these positions, tackle, tight end, corner, defensive line, they take a year or two to develop as they take their lumps. My question is, which rookie do you think will have the biggest impact in 2024 and beyond? Thank you.
Thank you to Vincent, and I wanted to thank you for sharing the story about your friend Andy. We're very sorry that you lost your friend Andy, but it's a reminder of just how serious cystic fibrosis is of a condition. If you want to donate to the cause and what we're trying to do to raise funds to help find a cure for cystic fibrosis, again, you can use the QR code that's on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, or go to the link finest.cff.org/PGH50 finest/Carter Critiques, or use the link that is attached to this show, whether it's on YouTube or your audio platforms. You can also find the link on my Twitter account at Carter Critiques. But to get to Vincent's question here, which I think is a really good one, Wes, is the impact that guys are going to have. And I know he said 2024, but I think he meant to say 2023 and beyond, because of course that's the upcoming season.
Sure.
But the impact of which player, kind of makes the biggest splash for this team moving forward. And Broderick Jones is always an easy answer because he's the first round pick, but also offensive linemen don't get the credit for being as splashy.
Right.
Players,
it's not as sexy, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Like they don't get stuff on the stat line. They don't get tackles. They don't get interceptions or score touchdowns unless something crazy.
Force fumbles, yeah.
Right. They don't get those opportunities. So part of me is tempted to say Joey Porter Jr., to stick with the theme of the first one here, because I think that part of this is also checking with this and saying, like, you know what? Imagine if Joey Porter Jr. does rewrite the script on what Steelers cornerbacks are, because for so long, Steelers cornerbacks were the weak spot of the defense. And, they got Joe Hayden and they were able to kind of hang in there for a little bit. But what if Joey Porter Jr. is the start of cornerbacks being a strength for the Steelers defense? If he is,
wouldn't that be something?
That could change the entire trajectory of what this organization could be like and make truly a dominant defense, as I believe they have the edge rushers. They have the defensive linemen. I still think they could do a little bit more at off-ball linebacker, but they have the best safety in football in Minkah Fitzpatrick. Imagine if they had now some top-flight cornerback play there. This defense would be in a position where there's very few weaknesses for even the stronger of offensive teams to pick at.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's a tough question because, it feels like you're kind of dialed in on either Broderick Jones or on Joey Porter Jr. I love the question by Vincent, and my immediate thought was I'm torn on this because the hardest position to come into the NFL and succeed right away as a rookie is quarterback, point blank, period. But I think second might be cornerback. Honestly, I really do. It's a lot to learn. It's a lot of language with your teammates. It's a lot of communication things. It's just very difficult to play defensive back in the NFL now with the way the game is, with the rules and the way everything is adjudicated. Like, quarterback is number one, but I think cornerback is the second hardest position to come in the NFL and succeed right away as a rookie. But I also think this year and going forward, I do think my answer would be Joey Porter Jr. because I think he's in a great place to succeed. As tough as it is right away at that position, it's hard. He's got guys like Patrick Peterson. He's got guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, KZ and Keanu Neal behind him and some different things that they could do there. Still guys like Witherspoon and Pierre that have been in the league for a long time. The Steelers, Broderick Jones could come in, and if everything goes well, he could have a substantial workload. Steelers could ask a lot from him pretty early on. I don't know if they're going to do that for Joey Porter Jr. I think they're going to ask him to just play a role in a defense that is already really solid. And so because of that, he is, I think, my immediate answer. But I think Keanu Benton and Darnell Washington deserve, if we're looking bigger picture, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years type thing, I think Keanu Benton is in that same kind of vein. They're going to ask him to do something very specific this year as a rookie alongside guys like Cam Hayward and Larry Ogunjobi, I was drawing a blank there, and just the other stable of options that they have. And Darnell Washington, I think, as long as he's healthy and everything checks out there, could certainly be an impactful player this year and beyond. But I think in the scope of the defense, what the Steelers have there, and Minkah Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt locked down, I think Joey Porter Jr. has a really great chance to not only have an impact this year in 2023, 2024, but like Vincent said, beyond as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on this. And I think it makes a lot of sense for what the Steelers could use. It's just depending on what Joey Porter Jr. can be, because the idea is if Broderick Jones becomes the pillar of the offensive line moving forward and they become the bully rushing offense, then maybe he becomes that guy. Because
for sure.
If they've drafted, let's compare all the players. Let's just say from all their picks, not saying that all of them are Hall of Famers, but if all of them, if you could pick one of these position players to be a Hall of Famer, which one would you want it to be?
I mean, it's got to be Broderick Jones, right?
If you get a Hall of Fame offensive tackle, right? You get a guy who's that dominant.
But you were telling me I'm getting Joe Thomas or I'm getting Trent Williams, like,
right?
Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Like that.
And I know they're the upper echelon, but I mean,
but again, you're getting a guy who's probably if he's gonna be an offensive lineman, you're probably getting him for the next decade or so. That means
12 years.
Not only, at least a decade, 12 years, kind of that max range where you're like, then it'd be like, okay, maybe he's thinking about retiring. But you get him there. Not only is he the pillar for your offensive line, he's protecting Kenny Pickett's blind side for most of his career.
Yeah.
And that's a thing there. And so it could be one of those things. Yeah, like you said, not the sexiest thing, but maybe it is Broderick Jones, because if you get the Hall of Fame here versus the Hall of Fame corner versus the Hall of Fame defensive lineman in Keanu Benton, or a Hall of Fame tight end in Darnell Washington, just thinking of those types of guys, it's tough to overlook the importance of protecting what you hope will eventually be a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Chris, and all this said too, it's just, I think, particularly tackle, offensive line play across the board is not great in the NFL right now, but I think particularly at the tackle position, I think the interior of offensive lines is a little bit stronger. There's not a lot of great tackles in the NFL right now, at least compared to, I think, where we've been in maybe the days of past. If you get one of those guys, that's huge. There's, I think, a lot more very good defensive backs and cornerbacks in the NFL than I think there are very good left tackles. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And so it's a position that, I mean, how many teams in the NFL right now, if you asked them, if you gave them truth serum, if you asked the head coach and the offensive coordinator and the GM, do you need to get better on the offensive line? I mean, 30 teams, 29 teams are saying yes. I mean, the Eagles might not, the Niners might not, but there's rare exceptions there. And so, if you had your pick of the litter of which of these guys is going to have a great decade-long career, all-pro type career, you got to go with the left tackle.
I'm right with you. And so maybe the answer there is to our friend Vincent's question, maybe it's Broderick Jones. But again, it's about who steps up into that role. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how all that plays out. We'll keep talking about that. Rookie camp is just around the corner, starts up this Friday at the Steelers facility. We'll keep you updated with all the situations there. But I want to revisit a topic with the NFL draft that doesn't necessarily involve the Steelers class this year, but Kenny Pickett, and something that I talked about last year and how it played into this year's quarterback class. We'll address that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Uhler. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Wes, I've been wondering if we rejumbled everything that Kenny Pickett, with this year's draft class of quarterbacks, with Kenny Pickett, where would he fall in this draft class? And that was a question asked.
This is good. This is real good.
And this is interesting. And it's tough for me to say it before a draft class plays out because, like, for example, there were reports that Will Levis is going to go 3rd overall. And I'm just like, I don't see it. And then, of course, he didn't. And then I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. But, even last year, I was on the fence. I was on the fence of advocating, you know what? If the Steelers use that 20th overall pick or traded up to get, a Kyle Hamilton or one of those other premier players that wasn't a quarterback, I think he's fine because I also didn't think Kenny Pickett would last to pick 20. I thought he'd be gone at the latest by pick
to Carolina. Yeah.
Right. Something like that. And I was just like, he's not going to be around. But when he fell to 20, I'm like, well,
got to take him.
You got to take him.
Yeah.
So the question then would be, where would Kenny Pickett fall in this draft class? Now, to remind us all, quarterbacks taken this year, Bryce Young went 1st overall to the Panthers. C.J. Stroud went 2nd overall to the Texans. Anthony Richardson went 4th overall to the Colts. And then big drop-off for Will Levis until the 33rd overall pick to the Titans. And then and that was the 2nd round. Then to the 3rd round with Hendon Hooker going to the Lions at pick 68. So let's just stick with those 5 quarterbacks because I feel like Kenny Pickett would at least be taken before Hendon Hooker.
Yes.
Personally,
Absolutely.
I feel like he'd be taken before Will Levis was.
Absolutely.
What's funny about this, Wes? If Kenny Pickett's in this draft class, I think, if anything, he's just picked 3 spots higher because I think the Steelers would be the team that'd be like, he fell to 17, we'll take him. Like I'm saying, if the Steelers were in a position where they still needed Ben's successor.
Because if he was in this class, they'd still need his successor. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Bryce, I think those top guys would still go where they went. Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, I think everyone would still be grading them as those top guys. I think there'd still be question about Kenny Pickett's hand size. I think Anthony Richardson's numbers that he tested would still be something that people can't avoid. But maybe there'd be a team in that earlier range. Maybe the Titans wouldn't take him because they passed on him the year before.
Sure.
Malik Willis. But maybe there's other teams that would have taken a shot at him in that situation. Who knows how that plays out? But I think at least Kenny Pickett would have been picked 17th overall this year and been the 4th quarterback overall because off the board because he would have been taken by the Steelers.
Whew, you know what? It's funny because I didn't even think about that angle that you just did it there. But you're absolutely right. But you know what, Chris? I was honestly thinking, I think the Colts might have taken him 4th overall. I mean, you're telling me they're going to take Anthony Richardson over Kenny Pickett? I don't know. And remember, the Colts didn't have a 1st-round pick last year, so it's not like we can say, oh well, the Colts passed on Kenny Pickett at 8th last year, or they didn't have a 1st-round pick last year, so we don't know. I will say this. For whatever reason, I mean, last year was a weird year, right? Because the first quarterback off the board doesn't go until 20. I mean, we've hardly ever seen that. That is the ultimate exception to the rule. I think, you know what? It's funny though, because I was thinking he would have gone 4th to the Colts. Like, I think Young and Stroud would have still gone 1 and 2, but the Colts were going to take a quarterback, and they would have taken Kenny Pickett. If not, though, if they still decide to go with Anthony Richardson just because they love the athleticism and the potential upside and all the unknown, right? The juice that's still there left to squeeze with him. You're absolutely right. He wouldn't have made it past 17 to the Steelers. In fact, maybe even the Steelers end up going to 14 or something like that to take Kenny Pickett after they would have, let's say, hypothetically had a year with Mitch Trubisky and found out that he wasn't the guy and decided, okay, let's go get our guy. But yeah, I don't think there's any way he makes it past 17. I certainly think he's a 1st-round pick. And he could have gone 4th overall to the Colts because I think there's just as many, if not more, questions about Anthony Richardson than there was. Yeah, Kenny Pickett had his questions and the hand stuff that we can all laugh about now. And, you know, he had one great season. How do you evaluate that as opposed to some of the other body of work,
right?
These things, right? All those questions and more are there with Anthony Richardson. So
yep.
I think he could have gone. I think he could have gone 4th. I'm certainly with you. He absolutely would have not lasted past 17. But I do like it's a great question by you. It is, especially how because you either set me up that I have to say nice things about Kenny Pickett, or if I would have said mean things about him, then it would have just been, oh well, shut up, Hill Jack. You just hate Kenny Pickett because he went to Pitt and you're at WVU. It's very cerebral of you, Mr.
I had
Carter.
no such plans, sir.
I like it.
Malicious about this at all.
I like it. But yeah, no, he honestly could have gone 4th. But I think you're absolutely right. He doesn't make it past 17.
I think part of what this happens, and Louis Riddick, who I respect a lot of his draft opinions on, he talked about Kenny Pickett being his top quarterback in the draft class. He said because before, Mac Jones was his top quarterback in that class before because of similar things, the way they see the field and their accuracy. And to him and to a lot of NFL teams, those are 2 primary pieces of importance. You know, Bryce Young, an accurate quarterback who sees the field, smaller, but still has that going for him. In this draft class and in his skill set. You look at CJ Stroud, accurate, stronger arm, bigger. He's a guy that definitely fits that profile. So I look at that, and then I look at the rest of these guys. Will Levis, if I was going to look at one of his weaknesses, it'd be seeing the field, and that's why I would think, well, I mean, Kenny Pickett gets that above him, and Anthony Richardson. I'd say Anthony Richardson. I'd take Kenny Pickett's field vision over his, but then it would be a question, do you want the premier athlete who may be the best overall pure athlete that's ever been drafted at quarterback next to Michael Vick, or do you want the guy who looks more like the field general? And that would have been, I think what it would have happened there would be everyone knows Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are going 1A, 1B. And then there just would have been a constant debate of Kenny Pickett versus Anthony Richardson, and it would have never ended until draft day.
You're absolutely right. It would you're 100% spot on with that, and hey, that would have been a fun storyline. It absolutely would have been. But I think like Will Levis was kind of. I think there was some Hendon Hooker vibes. You know what I mean to last year, where a lot of people talked up. Sorry, not Hendon Hooker. Pardon me.
You're good.
I'm drawing a blank now. Liberty quarterback. It was Malik Willis.
Malik Willis.
There was clearly a lot of smoke and mirrors around Malik Willis last year, right? Where just teams didn't see him as that type of talent, and maybe they're trying to get somebody to reach for him, and you're always doing that thing around draft season. I think there was some of that clearly with Will Levis, whereas teams just didn't have a first-round grade on him, and they might have acted like they did, and they might have leaked out there, oh, yeah, we're thinking about taking this guy at pick 2 or pick 4 or pick 1 just to make other teams nervous and question things. But I think Anthony Richardson actually is what people tried to pretend Malik Willis was last year, if that makes sense. You get what I'm saying? Like, it could easily not work out, but there is the unknown upside of the athleticism and the arm strength and just not a huge body of work in college either for him. I think that is real with Anthony Richardson this year. Man, I don't know, though. It would have been tough for me to take him over Kenny Pickett after watching Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud off the board, because Kenny Pickett feels like a more sure thing. Anthony Richardson, could he have a nice career? Absolutely. Could the Colts be looking for another quarterback in another year or two? Absolutely. I don't think anybody was really saying that with Kenny Pickett. I think we always knew his floor was pretty high. The debate was just how high is his ceiling.
No, I agree with that sentiment here. I also wanted to look at just comparisons between the two, Anthony Richardson and Malik Willis. Anthony Richardson has 4 inches and about 30 pounds on Malik Willis. Malik Willis didn't test at the combine. Anthony Richardson ran a 4.43 40-yard dash. I know Malik Willis is athletic. I don't think he's that fast. And again, with that
Richardson's a freak athletically.
Exactly. And again, that's no slight to Malik Willis. It looks like he's out of a job because the Titans have also taken Will Levis and they
got a log jam of quarterbacks now.
Right. There's certainly some questions there. But again, I think it's really important to note, Anthony Richardson's freakish numbers, but like you said, teams would want They want the captain when they're drafting a quarterback. They prefer that. I think that is the priority when any team, goes and gets a guy in the NFL draft. They gets a quarterback in the NFL draft. They want the guy, not necessarily. Yes, you want playmakers. You want guys that are going to set the tone and be, and be the guy that can make the big plays to save you in the big moment. But to make those plays, you need heady play. And here's the thing about this: you compare it to Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, he wasn't the freak, kind of prospect that Anthony Richardson was, but looking at their relative athletic scores, Kenny Pickett was a 9.55 compared to Anthony Richardson, who was a 10.0. And the reason for that, Kenny Pickett, 6'3", decent height for a quarterback, 217, decent weight for a quarterback, ran a 4.73, not great, but actually pretty decent for a quarterback.
But not bad either, yeah.
Right. But then the things that he did really well, his vertical jump was 33.5, showing explosiveness. His broad jump also showing explosiveness.
His fake slide was a 10 out of 10.
It was a 10 out of 10.
What happened?
Yeah. Hey,
Kenny Pickett. What's the stereotype, right, Chris? He's sneaky athletic.
Yes, he's sneaky athletic.
That's the one time I get to use the stereotype thing. He's sneaky athletic.
That is very true. Any white guy that comes in there,
white guy who's actually a decent athlete, he's sneaky athletic.
Because you never can
never just say he's a good athlete. He's sneaky athletic.
I mean, but when you compare his numbers, he's pretty good athletically. Like it is. Like when you look at the relative athletic score, and I'm sorry I don't have it to show on screen to our YouTube voters right now, but he scores very high, and he's not as high as Anthony Richardson. But again, Anthony Richardson was off the charts. He was something that we've never seen before, even with like guys like Lamar Jackson and Michael Vick.
Right.
But Kenny Pickett, as far as everything you ask him to do and what you're asking to measure him at the combine, at the pro day, he excels. So, sure, hand size and all that, but Kenny Pickett, I think, still would be a first pick. And you know what? That's not a bad point by you. He might have been 4th overall to the Colts.
He might have been, because I think you're right. It would have come down to those two, and one goes 4th to the Colts. And if Kenny Pickett ends up being not that guy, he doesn't make it any farther to 17. Now, the real question would be, right, how would the Steelers have felt about a Richardson-type prospect who's raw and pure in talent and traits? Right. Versus the Kenny Pickett, who is much more polished, and you know what you're getting with the guy next door, right? Do the Steelers take AR at pick 17? I don't know. Whereas they definitely take Kenny Pickett if Richardson still, in this hypothetical world goes 4th to Indianapolis.
I hear you.
I like this conversation.
That was a fun little conjecture, not necessarily
good work.
This was a little different on.
If you hear me steal this topic on Steelers Nation Radio, mind your own business.
All I ask is that you call me into the show for that topic.
There we go. That's what
there we go. He's Wes Uhler. Wes, thanks so much for joining us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. Steeler Nation Radio with Arthur Moats. We're on at noon. You can also get us in podcast form easier, just on demand whenever you want to listen. Steelers Blitz, wherever you get your podcasts. And then as Chris is always kind enough to let me plug, yes, I do all the West Virginia radios and podcasts as well, too. In the Gun and Ears and Beers, if you are a tortured Mountaineer soul like myself.
Absolutely. Again, thank you, Wes Uhler, to coming on to the show. Thank you all for checking out the show, whether it's on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. And we thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And if you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a shout out at the end of the show. And if you want to help out with our efforts here on this show to raise money for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, where we're trying to help them find a cure, use the QR code on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, or go to the link that is attached to this show, whether it's on all your audio platforms, or if you're watching on YouTube, there's a link there as well. But we have it on the audio platforms in the description of the show, as well as the YouTube platform. So go to those right now and donate at least $10. If you call in with that $10 donation, as well to our number 412-223-6644, you will get your call on the show within a week of your donation. And if you want to just donate, we just thank you very much for people like Vincent, who came in and donated money to us to help us raise funds for this great cause. We're back tomorrow with more talk on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike DeFabo from The Athletic will join us. We'll see what he's got to say as we get ready for rookie camp and the NFL schedule release coming out this week. Lots to talk about still. It's going to be a fun one. We'll see you then right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.